Let's talk a bit about Labour's planned social media crackdowns. The Labour Party, Keir Starmer, have mooted a series of policies. Many of them aimed at children, but not all of them. So earlier this week, we heard it being floated that phones will all be scanned for nude images to prevent children from sending and receiving naked pictures. I'm sure that people are not opposed to to some censorship on that level. There's talk of banning harmful social media platforms to under 16s. It's not clear which ones are deemed harmful and which ones are not. But also in the context of Belfast, we've seen uh, Hilary Benn, the Northern Ireland Secretary, and Liz Kendall, the Technology Secretary, suggesting that there will need to be more rapid response to taking down fake news and content that incites violence in times of crisis. I mean, of course, it's a different situation for teenagers. Teenagers don't really have freedom of speech in the way that adults do. Of course, we don't let them watch 18 rated films and things like that. I don't think that's particularly controversial. But I think what a lot of people are worried about is that, it starts with teenagers and then there's this bit of a slippery slope.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think I do worry about social media, I have to say. Never mind teenagers, I think adults spend too long on social media. One of the reasons I've never used X or Twitter, as it used to be called, is because, I don't want to get addicted to it as some people do, and they spend all their time on there. I do think these things have an impact on people's ability to concentrate. I don't think they are the cause of the crisis of concentration. I think that's a broader cultural question. It's a question of education and teaching kids to read, which happens less and less, and all those broader cultural issues need to be looked at first. But I do think probably social media culture exacerbates that by feeding us these constant little snippets of news and snippets of video, and I do think that kind of distracts us from sitting down and reading a book. I mean, that's what I hear from friends of mine all the time, that they find it increasingly difficult to focus. So there are problems there, but all of Starmer's proposals won't do anything whatsoever to address those issues. I'm amazed at the extent to which the social media ban has become his big issue. It's the only thing he seems to talk about now. You've got people being killed on the streets of Britain, and you've got riots, and you've got all sorts going on, and he just says, I'm going to ban social media. Don't worry, I'll do it. There could be a nuclear war, and he'd come out with a statement about social media for under 16s. It's ridiculous. I think the two issues with it is, first, that it seems to me to be unworkable. Kids are pretty good at getting around these things. That's the evidence from Australia. They'll just crack on. They'll find other ways to share their ideas, share their images, and so on. The idea of the state scouring kids' phones in some way, with AI or whatever it is, for nude images, that absolutely terrifies me. I think that's a really crazy idea, and there must be different ways in which we can control that problem. But I think the main issue, Fraser, as you say, is that their real thirst, their real urge is to control what us adults can see on social media. That's really what it comes down to. Children are being used as a shield, I think, to throw open social media to further and further state interference. That's what's happening. And that's been the role of children in censorship for all of time. They constantly, that old phrase, won't someone think of the children? Censors have always used the excuse of vulnerable children to implement censorship that primarily impacts on adults. And that's what we're seeing here. And that's why they're talking about taking down fake news after something like the stabbing in Belfast, or removing misinformation, whether it's about Brexit or the European Union or immigration, whatever else it might be. This is about thought control. They want to control what people can see, what they can say, what opinions they can form. They think they are the dispensers of the ultimate wisdom and the correct information, and everything else is potentially wrong, potentially dangerous, and potentially should be censored. So they're using children as an excuse to get to adults. And it's fundamentally political speech, especially dissenting speech, that they really want to control.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you do sort of wonder what ever happened to evidence-based policy. As you say, Brennan, the evidence from Australia is that the social media ban, certainly this blanket social media ban, doesn't work.
Yeah.
6 in 10 Australian under 16s are still using the social media sites that they're not allowed to do, that it's illegal for them to use. You think about also, it wasn't that long ago, we implemented the Online Safety Act, which was supposed to turn the internet into a kind of child-friendly space. And there's been some disastrous, instances of censorship that has created that we've documented a lot on Spike. But also, clearly, the call for a ban on social media means that hasn't worked in the way that it's intended. So yeah, well, Rakib, what do you make of this? I mean, this is clearly, at the very least, unworkable.
No, naturally, we want restrictions when it comes to hardcore content where younger children may well get addicted to. It might also impact on the way they develop relationships further down the line. The way that young boys, for example, might view younger women. And I think also, in some ways, it sets hugely unrealistic, if not toxic, understandings of intimacy. For example, I think these are very important things that we should talk about. But Brendan's also right. I just think that I think the approach there is actually teaching and working with younger people and actually talking frankly and openly about those kind of issues. It can't just be done by introducing blanket bans online. I think that, and as Brendan's also said, that younger people, they're very innovative and creative. They'll find ways to circumvent these restrictions. In that sense, they might be very motivated in terms of doing that. But I also think that there's also that risk of online safety measures ultimately masquerading in terms of its politically motivated censorship. In that way, and I think that's obviously a very serious problem. And I think we've seen instances with that connected with the Online Safety Act, and I think that is a very serious problem. And I think that there needs to be a broader discussion in terms of, we're talking about, quite often it's young people we tend to focus on, but adult addiction to sort of social media is also a very real thing that is something that Brendan touched on. So I think there are ways to address certain problems in society. I think that in a way, social media bans, I think that they're hugely simplistic. In some ways, they're not workable, and they might not even achieve intended aims. But even worse, we talk about, this is ultimately about online safety, when in some cases it's clear that it's ultimately about clamping down on various forms of political dissent, which you don't want in our liberal democratic society. So all in all, I'm very skeptical of these kind of measures, not only in terms of their sort of effectiveness, but actually what they're actually designed for. Truly, if there are sort of, how would you say, alternative intentions behind them. So I think that's my general view on it. And I think we need to see examples in other countries in terms of how it hasn't worked so well. We shouldn't ignore those kind of international case studies when it comes to what you mentioned there, Fraser. Ultimately, what we want to promote is evidence-driven policy.